Lena Brooks had barely stepped through the crystal doors of the Hampton Crown ballroom when that sentence dropped like a razor-sharp blade, slicing through the semi-classical music, drifting under the glass dome I don't recall allowing someone of your kind to walk in here. A frozen beat followed a shock ripping through the air as $100 million ballroom turned into a courtroom, and she, the black woman, in a minimalist black dress, became the defendant. No one allowed to speak. Light from hundreds of candles reflected off the glossy red-lacquered walls, turning every gaze toward Lena like sharpened spears. She stood still, spine straight, a thin black stroke that refused to break in the middle of America's upper-class extravagance. Across from her, Ava Harrington tilted her body with a smug smile. Her cold blue eyes swept over Lena, the way one might glance at an outdated object. "You must be lost," Ava said, her voice, sugary sweet, but cutting like a razor. "This is not the area for service staff." Echoes followed soft laughter, camera shutters, the faint clink of champagne glasses. A chorus of cruelty. Richard Harrington, patriarch of the family, whose presence made half of New York's business world bow, simply stood with folded arms, his aging eyes carrying more disdain than any spoken insult. Tyler Harrington, the 24-year-old heir, lifted his phone and began live streaming in the middle of the ballroom as if expecting low-tier entertainment. "Oh my God, look at this, everyone." He sneered the show's getting good. And within a handful of seconds, Lena, who had arrived as an honored guest of the event, became the laughingstock of thousands of viewers replaying the moment she stood motionless. But what hurt her more than any words were the eyes of those who said nothing. Wealthy guests, young entrepreneurs, men in immaculate three-piece suits. They were not on Ava's side, but they were not on Lena's side either. They lowered their heads, stared at their phones, hid behind the privilege of silence. A violent wave of emotion surged through Lena's chest, anger, humiliation, but beneath it was something deeper, a pain she knew all too well. She had lived this before, too many times to count. Yet tonight, in this dazzling glow of baccarat chandeliers, it felt heavier. Not because she was weaker, but because she had built her entire career by breaking these invisible walls, and now they still stood arrogant and towering right in front of her. Two security guards stepped forward at Ava's signal. Silence thickened instantly. They positioned themselves on either side of Lena, eyes alert as if she were a threat. No one bothered to ask why. "We need to see your invitation," one guard said in a mechanical tone. Lena drew a long breath. Her hand tightened on her black clutch. Then she gently pulled out a gold-embossed invitation, a VIP card from the organizers. Here she said, her voice so steady it made Ava falter for a split second. But only for a second. "Oh, please, Eleanor Harrington," scoffed, "those kinds of invites are all over the internet. $200 gets you a whole stack." The guard examined the card and frowned. "It appears valid, ma'am." Appears Eleanor's smile sharpened like acid. "You do know the real invites have embedded security chips, right? That is clearly a fake." Whispering spread around them. Did the woman forge her way in? Was she trying to sneak into a billionaire event? Ava tilted her head, her smile turning venomous. "If you wanted to network, you should have chosen a place that fits your level. Don't you think?" Tyler added, full of glee. "Keep going, this is gold. My Instagram views are climbing." Every comment hit like a punch. But Lena did not step back, did not gasp, did not react. Her eyes remained calm like the surface of a night lake, a kind of calm that unsettled people who thrived on arrogance. And indeed, Ava was growing unsettled. "Well, why are you still standing there? Take her to the staff area." Lena lifted her chin, her gaze soft yet sharp, like a blade wrapped in velvet. "I will go," she said slowly, "but before that—" The room held its breath. "You should check your guest list again." In that instant, something shifted in the air, thin and sharp like lightning, signaling a coming storm. No one knew why. No one knew what waited ahead. But everyone felt it. The storm had a name, Lena Brooks. And tonight, it would not only sweep through the ballroom, it would swallow an entire empire. Yet at the very moment Lena chose not to remain silent, another ache rose within her, deep and persistent. Why, she wondered, must I still stand under these eyes? Why is my worth still questioned because of my skin? The thought ignited like a spark in her chest. But beneath the pain, another fire blazed brighter, the fire of pride of truth, and of a power no one in this room was wise enough to recognize, until it was far too late. And tonight, very soon, they would learn that the cost of contempt can outweigh the value of any empire they believed would last forever. Lena had not even taken half a step when whispers erupted across the room, like fire sweeping through dry grass. The phone in Tyler's hand buzzed non-stop as thousands of views climbed every passing second. The spoiled heir lifted his device closer to his face, thrilled as if he had just discovered gold. "Everyone get ready for the best door-blocking moment of the year," he murmured into the camera, loud enough for nearby guests to hear clearly. Lena felt the invisible shift in the eyes around her: curiosity, disdain, amusement, and cruelty. A kind of cruelty that always thrived in rooms where power was excessive and empathy was scarce. But what they all carelessly missed was the message that had just flashed across the small screen in Lena's hand, changing her gaze entirely, making it deeper and sharper. Meridian Council final confirmation, needed within 20 minutes. No one heard the slowing beat of Lena's heart, and no one knew that the moment they were treating as entertainment was actually the final calm before a financial earthquake that would sweep across the entire city. The guard on her left, a middle-aged man with weary eyes, stared at Lena one heartbeat longer. Maybe he sensed something was wrong. But before he could speak, Ava pushed forward like an arrow dipped in arrogance. "All right, deal with her quickly." She ordered, her tone the same one she would use on a defective product. "I do not want our event contaminated by impersonators." Right then, a small voice emerged from the crowd, dripping with mockery. Wow, confident. Much. She really thinks she is someone important. A group of women in glittering gowns giggled, unaware that within minutes, their smug amusement would turn them into silent witnesses of one of the most dramatic reversals they had ever seen. Lena did not move. Her eyes did not flinch, did not lower, did not tremble. That quiet steadiness made Ava momentarily uneasy, though she refused to admit it. People with nothing usually panicked, but Lena was calm to the point of discomfort. "My invitation," Lena said again, her voice soft, but carrying an uncanny weight, was issued directly by the Harrington Foundation office. If you want to avoid embarrassing yourselves, this is your last chance to verify it. Eleanor laughed, a brittle sound, like shattering glass. How adorable. You think we will double-check just because you want us to? Tyler brought the camera closer, zooming straight into Lena's face. "Tell me," he demanded, "why are you even here? Hunting for sponsors? Looking for a photo spot to impress your friends?" Lena looked directly into the lens. That gaze made Tyler freeze the first moment he sensed he was no longer controlling the situation. No, Lena replied lightly, almost like a breeze. I am here to determine whether your family deserves a collaboration worth several $billion. A sudden silence smothered the room. Guests lifted their heads. Half-spoken jeers died mid-sentence. Richard, who had been watching from behind with self-assured arrogance, immediately frowned. What are you talking about? Lena did not answer him yet. Instead, she stepped half a pace to the right, moving out of the direct chandelier light, then pulled her phone from her clutch. The motion was subtle, decisive, carrying the unmistakable energy of someone who knew she was holding a lever capable of shaking the foundation of an entire conglomerate. The room held its breath as she made the call. No one knew who she was contacting, but every instinct in the room began sounding alarms. Marcus Lena said, when the line connected, her voice low, but carrying through the ballroom, because the tension made even the smallest sound ring crystal clear. I am at the Harrington event. There is an issue with transparency and with the attitudes of their representatives. From the phone speaker, a deep, steady male voice replied, Lena, if you confirm it, we can halt the partnership announcement immediately. Ava went pale. Richard tightened his grip on his champagne glass until his knuckles turned white. Tyler lowered his phone, genuine fear replacing arrogance. Wait. Hold on. Richard stammered. Who are you? You have not even said all evening. Lena lifted her chin, her dark eyes flashing with an icy sharpness that made Eleanor step back half a pace. I have been patient, she said slowly, but you have underestimated me to a point beyond saving. Whispers flared up again. Some guests recognized the voice on the phone, Marcus Langford, chairman of Meridian Holdings, the corporation, preparing to finalize the largest deal of the year. Marcus Lena continued enunciating every word. Activate the contingency plan. Halt the entire partnership. I will send you the full report afterward. The room exploded, not in screams, but in silence. A suffocating, crushing silence that choked every ounce of arrogance lingering in the air. Tyler stumbled backward and tripped over a chair. Ava opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Richard could no longer stand up straight. No, this cannot be, he whispered. Lena ended the call and placed her phone on the buffet table beside her, and in that precise moment, the pain she felt upon entering the ballroom softened, replaced by something else, the ruthless calm of someone who had just decided the fate of an empire. But beneath that calm lay a single thought, only she could hear. I fought my entire life to stand in this place, and you still believe I do not belong here. The sting of humiliation lingered like an unhealed scar. But now that pain had become fuel, a fire powerful enough to burn down every illusion of superiority the Harringtons had ever clung to, that was the moment Lena understood. Tonight was not simply the night she was insulted. It was the night she shattered a rotting myth, and by tomorrow night the entire country would know it. The moment the final beep of her call with Marcus faded, a wave of panic swept across the ballroom like a poisonous wind. Champagne glasses froze mid-air, and the haughty gazes from moments earlier shattered into fragments of fear. Lena stood still, her hand resting lightly on her phone, her eyes calm to the point of danger. Her silence clashed violently with the chaos, beginning to seep into every corner of the room. Richard was the first to break it. He no longer resembled the man who had once appeared on the cover of Forbes, now just someone drowning in shock. What have you just done? His voice trembled. Do you have any idea how important that deal is? Lena turned to him slowly, her gaze flat and still like a lake before a storm. I know. And because I know, I stopped it. Eleanor's jaw dropped, her hands trembling so hard she let her clutch fall. "Who do you think you are?" to Lena. Cut in her tone, soft but sharp as steel, the one with the authority to decide. Her gentle words detonated across the room like an explosion. Behind her, several business guests instinctively stepped back, realizing that what they were witnessing was no longer mere entertainment, but the downfall of a family. Tyler, phone still in hand, suddenly angled the camera away, his fingers shaking uncontrollably. His live stream had hit 40,000 viewers, but he no longer had the thrill to perform, because everyone online was now asking the same question: who is she? And ironically, Tyler did not know the answer either. Ava tried to hold on to her arrogance, but her voice had lost its solidity. "Are you trying to threaten us? Impress us? Who do you think you are, some kind of superhero?" Lena looked at her for a long moment, as if observing someone who had never understood true responsibility. "You think I came here to impress you?" Lena said. "I came to see whether your family has the integrity to become Meridian's partner. And now the answer is clear." She closed the sentence with a thin smile, not mocking, not triumphant, just the expression of someone who had foreseen this ending the moment she walked in. Behind them, Daniel Kim from Bloomberg abandoned his wine glass, fumbled for his laptop, and began typing so fast his fingers blurred. No one paid him any attention, but he knew the truth. This was not a business update. This was an earthquake. "Stop!" Richard suddenly lunged toward Lena, eyes filled with panic and desperation. "You cannot cancel a deal because of a few insulting words. We have thousands of employees, dozens of projects relying on Meridian's capital, and you treated a potential partner like trash." Lena interrupted her voice, even and cutting. "That was not a personal insult. It was a warning sign about your family's core values." The room fell silent. The air thickened into stone. Ava attempted to interject. "It was just a misunderstanding. You are overreact." Lena raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" "Yes, you are being too." Ava did not finish her sentence. Lena unlocked her phone, set it on the table and turned the screen toward the Harringtons. 3 missed calls from Meridian board. Tyler choked. "No way." Lena spoke her voice, low, deep, and slow. "You believed I did not belong here because I was silent. But what you never understood is this: people with true power do not need to speak to prove it." The ballroom felt strangled by an invisible hand. Guests' smiles vanished. Their breathing slowed. A middle-aged man at a nearby table whispered, "She is not an ordinary person." Daniel Kim dropped his pen. "Wait, Meridian board, is she the one coordinating the deal?" Lena did not answer. She did not have to. The truth was peeling itself across the Harringtons' faces. Eleanor clutched her husband's arm, voice trembling. "Richard, oh God." Richard swallowed hard, as though forcing out a sentence too heavy for his throat. "Who are you?" Lena met his gaze, sharp as a blade, but tinged with sadness, the sadness of someone who had seen too much ugliness in the world. "Someone you should have treated with the most basic respect the moment I walked in." Her voice landed like a death sentence. Tyler stumbled backward, crashing into the dessert table, spilling wine across the white cloth like a spreading stain of blood. Ava gripped her own wrist, trying to steady herself, but her voice shook. You cannot do this to us." Lena tilted her head slightly, her lips forming a soft, mournful smile. "I am not doing anything to you," she said. "You did it to yourselves." Right then, Richard's phone rang. A sharp, slicing ringtone cut through the air. He stared at the screwn eyes, widening as though someone had struck him in the chest. It is the chairman of Meridian," he whispered. Ava pulled her hand back as if burned. Tyler went pale. Eleanor nearly lost her balance. Richard did not dare answer. Lena simply watched him. Finally, with a trembling hand, visible to everyone, Richard accepted the call. "Hello." His voice sounded like a man stepping into a courtroom. From the other end came a calm but weighty voice. "We have received confirmation from Dr. Brooks. The deal is terminated." Richard's vision dimmed. "Wait, please. You should correct your team," Marcus said coldly. "A family that cannot respect its partners cannot become ours." Richard opened his mouth to plead, but Marcus had already hung up. And just like that, in a matter of minutes, the most self-assured empire in the room collapsed like a century-old structure crushed under its own arrogance. No one spoke. No one breathed loudly. No one dared look at one another. Lena turned away, walking with the slow, deliberate steps of someone who had just closed the final chapter of a tragedy. But in her chest there was no triumph, only the hollow ache of someone who realized something devastating. Other people's pride can destroy far more than they ever imagined. And they had just done it. Not from lack of money, not from lack of power, but from lack of dignity. Lena took another step. Behind her, the ballroom sank into the quiet of those who had lost everything and could not understand why they had never seen it coming. But she knew this was only the beginning. The storm had not even truly begun. The moment Richard Harrington's hand slipped from the edge of the table, the entire ballroom felt caught in an invisible web of electricity, where every movement seemed dangerous. The silence stretched so long that people could hear their own heartbeat, the ragged breaths of guests who were used to power, yet had never witnessed power ripped away by a few words spoken softly as air. Lena stood beneath the glimmer of the chandeliers, still and detached, as if she were not the eye of the storm. But that very detachment only sharpened the truth, cutting deeper into the pride of the Harrington family. Tyler was the first to break the silence, but his voice shattered like falling glass. No way. Just one phone call. Just someone like you could... Lena slowly turned her eyes, locking onto him instantly, choking the rest of his sentence. "Someone like me." She repeated her voice, low and unnervingly calm. Tyler swallowed hard, feeling for the first time in his life what it meant to be strangled by one's own words. I didn't mean I, but he could not finish. Lena's gaze pierced straight through the mask of entitlement he had worn since birth. No one rushed to help him. No one defended him. No one dared. Everyone knew he had stepped into a battle he was not built for. Ava inhaled sharply, trying to gather the arrogance that once helped her sign million-dollar contracts with a single smile. But tonight her voice broke on the very first syllable. "Listen, we are sorry if you felt disrespected." Lena laughed, not loudly, not mockingly, but in a way that slapped Ava straight across her pride. "Felt," Lena echoed. "Felt," disrespected Ava's face, drained of color. Eleanor trembled violently, still clinging to her husband's wrist as though the truth itself might make her collapse. Richard tried to regain control, but his voice had lost every trace of his usual authority. "We did not know. We did not know who you were if we had known you knew enough," Lena cut in. "You just did not care." The sentence hit the room's weakest spot. It was not only true, it was an indictment, a verdict, and the very reason a multi-billion-dollar deal had fallen apart. And yet that collapse was only the surface. The deeper destruction was what Lena was about to reveal. She opened her clutch softly, took out a thin silver card and set it on the white tablecloth, as if it were nothing more than an accessory. But no one in the room thought it was ordinary. This, Lena said, is an access card to Meridian's executive wing. Only 12 people in the entire corporation have one. Again, the room held its breath. Some guests whispered, "Impossible, so she is." She is what Lena turned to them, her gaze as cold as a winter night. Someone you assumed did not deserve to stand in this room. Richard recoiled. Tyler clutched the table to keep from falling. Ava froze like stone. Eleanor raised a trembling hand to cover her mouth, eyes wide, as if she were seeing a ghost from the past she once buried. Lena stood there, the light tracing her collar like a steel edge, and she spoke without raising her voice or threatening, yet every word landed like a hammer. "I am the person the board entrusted with approving all strategic transactions of Meridian Holdings, including the deal with Harrington Industries." You could have heard a pin drop. Some guests stepped back instinctively, as if standing too close would let them witness the Harringtons' downfall too clearly. But Lena was not finished. She pulled a folded document from her jacket, opened it, and laid it beside the card. No one dared breathe. "This," she said, "is the shareholder disclosure you never bothered to notice, because you believed the world revolved around you. On the document was a number 35.2% of Harrington Industries." Richard collapsed into a chair, as if all his strength had been sucked out in an instant. Eleanor burst into tears, not from regret, but from terror at what they had unknowingly destroyed. Tyler stared at the document as though it were his death sentence. Ava covered her mouth, unable to hide her loud, panicked breathing. Lena looked at each of them slowly, as if studying a painting rotting beneath its gold leaf after too many years of being hidden. "I have watched you for years," Lena said, her voice flat but aching with truth. "Watched how you speak about your employees, how you negotiate with partners, how you bury discrimination lawsuits. I know you better than you know yourselves." Richard wept. Ava backed against the wall. Tyler turned away, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Eleanor sobbed like someone receiving a terminal diagnosis, but there was no triumph in Lena's expression, not even a flicker. Only the cold quiet of someone who understood far too well that this moment was inevitable, not vengeful. "You think you are powerful," Lena said softly. "But real power does not come from wealth. It comes from how you treat the people you believe can never hurt you." The room did not move. No one blinked. Lena continued, her voice gentle but sharp enough to carve itself into the minds of everyone there. "And tonight your own attitude, not me, is what cost you everything." Then she turned away. Each step she took echoed like a hammer, striking the coffin of the Harrington Empire. When the elevator doors closed behind her, the ballroom became a silent hell, filled with people who had just watched their dynasty tear itself apart. But that was only the beginning, because from this moment on the Harrington family would face the greatest truth of all: they had insulted the wrong person, and that mistake was worth more than any sum of money they had ever believed they possessed. The elevator doors slid shut, but the shockwave of what had just happened didn't end. It detonated like a timed bomb, exploding at the very last second, ripping through the Hampton Crown ballroom with brutal force. Within only a few minutes, Tyler's live stream had surpassed 80,000 views, and the number kept climbing, as if the entire internet were racing to witness the moment a billionaire dynasty was exposed in real time. Comments poured in like a hailstorm. "What is happening? Who would dare insult someone who owns part of their company? Is that really Lena Brooks? Oh my God, she is actually with Meridian. The Harringtons just smashed their own skulls against a wall. The air inside the ballroom thickened like wet mud. What had once been a symbol of upper-class luxury, the graceful music, the elegant laughter, the costly champagne, had now become a deathly stage, where every gaze locked onto the Harrington family, as if watching a train wreck that no one could stop. Ava stood frozen under the lights, her eyes wide and empty. Her usually immaculate golden hair now hung lifelessly around her shoulders. Her hands trembled so violently that her nails dug into her own skin. Every time she lifted her head, she saw dozens of phone cameras pointed at her, exposing every fracture in the armor of power she had polished for years. Tyler braced himself against the table, his face pale as paper. He no longer dared touch his phone, because every time the screen lit up, hundreds of notifications flared to life like blades of truth stabbing straight into his chest. "Idiot," a guest whispered behind him. He live-streamed the exact moment his family smeared itself in ash. Another replied, "Yeah." He crushed the company's future with his own hands. Eleanor proud her entire life with the pearl necklace she never took off, now trembled like a lost child. Her eyes were red, her lips shaking. She clung to Richard's arm as if he were a raft in a storm. But Richard could no longer hold himself up, let alone his collapsing family. He stood there, breath-heavy, staring into empty space without seeing a thing. In the corner of the room, Daniel Kim finished writing his first article for Bloomberg. He hit publish, fully aware he had just triggered an aftershock in New York's financial world. The article hit the homepage in less than 60 seconds. Its title cut like a blade, "Woman Humiliated," at gala revealed to be major Harrington Industries shareholder and the decision-maker behind the billion-dollar deal cancellation. His screen lit up with numbers soaring like rockets, 2,000 views, 3,000, 5,000, then 70,000. Ava saw Daniel typing, and the fear in her eyes twisted into panic. What are you doing?" Daniel looked up, his gaze cold and sharp, like a surgeon's scalpel, the gaze of a man who had just witnessed truth and valued it far more than the pleas of someone who used to stand above others. "My job," he said, "and you should worry about yours." No one laughed. There was nothing left to laugh about. A phone rang sharply, slicing through the suffocating silence. This time it was not Richard's. It was Ava's. The screen flashed Harrington Board of Directors emergency call. Ava stared at it, as if staring at a death warrant. She hesitated, but the pressure of watching eyes forced her to answer. Ava, a board member's voice, came through dry and cold as wind whipping across bare skin is what that woman said. True Ava couldn't lie. She could not excuse. She could not run. Everything had been live-streamed. Everything exposed. Yes, her voice shook violently. We were wrong. You destroyed the biggest deal in the company's history. He said each word, striking like a hammer against steel. We are convening tonight. Ava could not respond. Once the call ended, she could barely remain standing. Nearby, Tyler collapsed into a chair, his head in his hands. Guests began quietly leaving the ballroom, not because they were finished watching, but because they were afraid of being recorded alongside this ruined family. Each clack of high heels on the marble floor sounded like nails being hammered into a coffin. But what made the Harrington downfall truly tragic was not the scorn of outsiders. It was the silence of those who once praised them. those who only needed to see them walk into a room to force a flattering smile, those who once called them influential. Now all of them stepped back, as if the Harringtons carried a contagious disease. Richard finally spoke, his voice shredded. We have to find her. Talk to her, explained Begg. But Eleanor cut in. She's not someone who can be persuaded. Tyler shook his head weakly. Not she, her. Lena Brooks. Ava broke down into sobs, her elegant facade crumbling completely. I did not know she was a shareholder. I thought Richard roared. You thought you run this family on thought. Ava bowed her head, shoulders shaking. But the truth was, none of it was only her fault, or only Tyler's, or only Eleanor's. They all contributed to this catastrophe. What they did not yet realize was that the catastrophe was still growing outside, spreading at lightning speed across social media, news outlets, the finance world, and the phones of ordinary people watching the live stream. Hashtags erupted instantly. Harrington fall, respect the right, people, Lena Brooks, power, and worse, Harrington racist. Within 3 minutes, the last one topped New York's trending list. 10 minutes later, the entire country. As the Harringtons desperately searched for any scrap of hope to cling to, a tidal wave of voices surged across the world. Do not disrespect someone you are not qualified to judge. Black women are strongest when they choose silence. The Harringtons just redefined failure. The world was watching, and it was not watching in the Harringtons' favor. Lena had not even stepped out of the building, but the truth was, she did not need to take another step. Their empire had already collapsed, and it all began with one seemingly harmless moment, a single careless insult spoken in a brightly lit ballroom. But sometimes, one insult is the spark powerful enough to bring down an entire dynasty, and tonight was exactly that night. Lena stepped out of the Hampton Crown like someone leaving a battlefield, not with the pride of a victor, but with the quiet stillness of a woman who knew the greater war was still ahead. The revolving doors closed behind her, sealing off the room where a dynasty was collapsing. Yet the echoes, Richard's ragged breathing, Ava's muffled sobs, Tyler's trembling panic still struck her mind like the aftershocks of an execution carried out without a blade. The night wind of New York tore through the street, carrying the scent of steel exhaust fumes and untold stories. Streetlights bled gold in her vision, but Lena kept walking her heels, clicking a firm, unfeeling rhythm on the pavement, utterly at odds with the media storm erupting behind her. Her phone vibrated non-stop calls from board members, from journalists, from fund directors, clamoring for a statement. But she ignored them all. Tonight, she did not want to talk. She did not want to explain. She did not want to be framed as a symbol of justice or the protagonist of social drama. She just wanted a single full breath a moment to believe that the fight against prejudice had finally cracked the wall of arrogance the Harringtons had built. But when she glanced through the glass panels of the building she had just left, she understood one thing clearly: this story would not end there. Nothing ends once the internet has touched it. Nothing ends when power is involved. Nothing ends when the cost of disrespect has surpassed the boundaries of forgiveness. She hailed a car. A black SUV pulled up the driver, bowing his head slightly. Lena slid into the back seat, resting her head against the cool leather. When the door shut, she let her shoulders drop for the first time in hours. "Take me home," she said. Just 2 words, but they carried an entire storm. The car began to move. Only then did she allow herself to look at her phone. The screen lit up, flooded with notifications. Bloomberg full article. Published. Reuters. Urgent, Harrington Industries in crisis. Financial Post, Lena Brooks, the silent powerhouse. Twitter 312,000 mentions in 40 minutes. The hashtags stung her chest. Respect Black Women, Lena Brooks, silence. Harrington exposed, power in stillness. But what made her breath catch was not the praise. It was the hundreds of messages from other black women. Thank you. You just did what we've waited a lifetime for. I cried watching the live stream. Thank you for not staying silent. The way you stood there, stronger than any speech. Lena placed a hand over her heart. The warmth of her palm pressed against a heartbeat that refused to slow. She had not wanted this. She had not gone to the gala to become a symbol or to wage a battle, and certainly not to destroy anyone. She only wanted to evaluate a potential partner, a partner she had considered carefully, a partner who could have supported the educational programs Meridian was preparing to launch. But instead, they chose to insult, belittle, intimidate, and humiliate, unaware that the woman they tried to degrade was the one holding the power they believed they possessed. As the SUV turned onto the avenue, under the hard white glare of the streetlights, Lena did not notice another car following from a distance, not because she was in danger, but because the world was now moving in the wake of her story, a story she had never meant to write. Meanwhile, inside the Hampton Crown, the storm had reached a point of no return. Harrington Industries Board of Directors gathered for an emergency meeting in the third-floor VIP room. No more wine, no more smiles, no more music. Only the trembling of people who had just realized their company's future was being crushed by mistakes that could never be undone. "She is the largest shareholder," a faint voice asked. "How did we let this happen? Who approved the sale of shares?" "No one approved anything," another answered. "She bought quietly through a subsidiary fund. No one noticed. No one checked. Because we assumed no one would dare challenge the Harrington family's control, a painful truth dropped heavily into the room. Now she can do anything she wants with us." Another voice joined in, shaking so violently the words nearly cracked. "When the market opens tomorrow morning, our stock will plummet. The press will destroy us. Shareholders will demand the removal of leadership." Ava heard every word, sitting frozen like a statue. Each sentence was another blade driven into her mind. Tyler curled up in a corner of the room, experiencing for the first time the true meaning of consequences. Not financial loss from his parents' money, but the consequences of ignorance, disrespect, and the absence of basic decency. Eleanor sobbed. "It is my fault I said things I should have never said." But Richard rasped in reply. Not to scold her, but like a man finally admitting the truth he had avoided all his life. "No, Eleanor. This is our fault. We lived our whole lives on arrogance, and tonight the price is everything." As the room slipped further into despair, another call came in, this time from their legal office. Mr. Harrington, the lawyer, said urgently, "Meridian has filed a formal suspension of all collaboration. Additionally, Washington Capital Management has submitted a request for a board meeting on Monday. They want to discuss leadership changes." No one spoke for several seconds. Then Ava broke into loud, fractured sobs. Tyler turned ashen. Eleanor collapsed into her chair. And Richard, he closed his eyes, pressing both hands over his face, like a man watching his own soul being torn to pieces. At that same moment, Lena had arrived at her apartment. She stood by the window looking down at the city. The lights of New York reflected across her face, but her eyes were distant. She knew this would erupt, but she had not imagined or perhaps had refused to imagine that it would become a global storm. She stood there alone in the night, and in a moment, unseen by anyone, Lena closed her eyes and released a long breath. Not one of exhaustion, not one of regret, but the breath of someone who understood she had just pushed an entire system into a spiral of change. But change sometimes needs a shock, and she had been that shock. Yet Lena also understood something the Harringtons had not yet grasped. This was only the first night. Tomorrow would be the hardest part, because the real storm had only just begun, and no one, not even her, could predict what it would take down next. By the next morning, New York woke to a storm not born from the sky, but from social media, from hundreds of articles, from clipped videos, analysis reels, outrage and praise, all circling around a single name, Lena Brooks. In just 8 hours, the story had spread across America. Newspapers that normally maintained a cold distance from scandals plastered Lena's name across their front pages. Television networks replayed again and again the moment Ava belittled her Tyler's live stream. Richard stumbling through the truth, and above all the moment, Lena placed her card on the table and revealed she owned more than 35% of Harrington Industries. That was the blow that shattered every structure of power the Harrington family believed they had locked in place for 3 generations. That morning, the stock market opened in rare chaos. Harrington Industries plummeted 14% in 10 minutes, then continued to fall with no sign of stopping. Shareholders panicked. Major investors called non-stop. Analyst reports flooded in, many of them repeating the same phrase, a crisis of ethical governance. All of them referenced the same woman who the night before had been mocked as someone who did not belong. But Lena did not look at the news with triumph. Her morning began with a cup of hot tea, not coffee, because she knew caffeine would spike her heartbeat when she needed absolute composure for her 9 o'clock meeting. She stood before the mirror, adjusted her collar, smoothed the seam of her black blazer. Not to look more powerful, but to look exactly like herself, someone who knew her worth without needing to broadcast it. The reflection in the glass was not the gaze of a victor. It was the gaze of a surgeon preparing for a major operation, and the patient was a company rotted by arrogance and delusions of power. Meanwhile, a few miles away, the Harrington family was living the worst morning of their lives. Richard walked into the corporate lobby, with a face drained of color, silver hair disheveled after a sleepless night. He had tried calling the board only to receive responses as cold as ice. We await the decision of the largest shareholder. Eleanor sat in the car, eyes swollen. She had reapplied her makeup 3 times, but nothing could hide the puffiness from crying. Her hands twisted together, clinging to the last threads of hope. Maybe she will listen if we apologize. Tyler sat in the back, his phone turned off, fleeing the thousands of messages, insults, demands for apology, and even threats of lawsuits from shareholders who had lost money because of his stupidity. And Ava, she was unraveling. She sat in the passenger seat, arms wrapped around her head, inhaling in broken gasps. She had once stood on stages, signed massive contracts, managed thousands of employees. Yet this morning she felt like a child cornered with no escape. At 8:52, Lena stepped into the lobby of Harrington Tower. No escorts, no bodyguards, no assistants. Just one woman with a calm that made the entire world uneasy. But the lobby was not calm. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashing like exploding stars. Dr. Brooks, Dr. Brooks, are you taking over Harrington Industries? Are you targeting the family? Are you planning to fire the entire leadership team? Are you behind a takeover plan? Lena answered only one sentence, and it silenced every voice. I am here to do what is right. 4 words, ringing like a hammer striking steel. She walked on, letting no one stop her. And then came the moment the Harrington family dreaded most. The meeting room door opened. Inside sat the board of directors, major shareholders, lawyers, financial advisors, all staring at her. Richard rose, attempting to step forward. "Dr. Brooks, please." "Sit down," Lena said. Not loud, not harsh, just a request spoken with the weight of a court order. Richard froze, and he sat. Ava looked at Lena, her eyes filled with terror and with a fragile, hopeless wish that perhaps remorse could win sympathy. Eleanor whispered an apology no one heard. Tyler kept his head bowed to the table. But Lena did not look at them as enemies. She looked at them as people who needed to hear the truth. "Let us begin." No gavel. No declaration. But her voice was so clear, everyone straightened in their seats. "Last night," she began, "your family did not simply insult me. You insulted the very values this company claims to uphold." On the large screen behind her appeared images: Ava's arrogant smirk, Tyler sneering into the camera, Eleanor saying, "People like you," Richard calling security. No one spoke. The board stared at the truth laid bare. Lena continued. What stopped the deal was not personal emotion. It was an issue of ethical governance, and a company that cannot treat its partners with equity cannot become a partner of mine. A strategic board member spoke up sharply. "Correct." Ava closed her eyes, a tear sliding down like a blade, cutting through her soul. Lena switched the slide. A chart appeared. "I would like to present a plan. Everyone focused. A plan to save this company from itself." Richard's eyes lit with hope. But that hope died before it took its first breath. "The board will vote to suspend the current CEO, Ava Harrington." Hands rose immediately. Ava saw it. Not one person defended her. Not one. "Suspend the COO, Tyler Harrington." Tyler let out a broken sound that barely counted as breath. "Remove Richard Harrington's voting rights for 6 months. Request that Eleanor Harrington step down from the Harrington Foundation board." Eleanor choked, gripping the table edge to keep from collapsing. Lena continued. "I also propose the establishment of a minority enterprise development fund, $50 million to be monitored with independent and transparent oversight." Several members nodded at once. "Additionally, the entire executive team will undergo mandatory unconscious bias training, 40 hours within the next 30 days. Slide after slide moved across the screen, each provision landing like a sealed verdict. But Lena did not speak with satisfaction. She spoke like a doctor, explaining what must be cut away if a patient wants to survive. As the meeting neared its end, Richard whispered, trembling, "Lena, please give us a chance to fix this." Lena looked at him, her gaze not angry nor vengeful, but carrying the exhaustion of someone who had spent a lifetime proving she deserved basic respect. "A chance," she said quietly, "is what I gave you last night." Richard bowed his head. Lena gathered her documents and rose. "Monday, 9 o'clock. I expect every restructuring measure to be executed exactly as stated." She walked toward the door, and with her hand on the handle, she added a final sentence, one that made every person in the room shiver. "If you want this company to survive." The door closed behind her. No one exhaled. Because the truth had fallen like a prophecy, none of them could fight. Power had changed hands. Lena had not come to destroy. She had come to rebuild. But before rebuilding, she had to clear away what had rotted, and this morning she had begun. News of the emergency meeting spread faster than any wildfire, and by noon, the entire executive floor of Harrington Tower was no longer the domain of its usual polished arrogance, but had transformed into a maze of tension, whispering frantic phone calls and hurried footsteps. Employees who once lowered their heads respectfully before any member of the Harrington family now looked at them with caution, confusion, or pity. The reverence was gone, blown away, as if by an overnight storm. On the 45th floor, lined with decades of framed triumphs from 3 generations, Richard walked slowly down the corridor, his face drained of color, each step weighed down by 100 kilograms of memories of the power he believed would last forever. The portraits of his ancestors seemed to stare at him, demanding to know, why did you let it all collapse in your hands? But Richard understood something the portraits could not. This was not a collapse caused by finances, not a failed acquisition, not a hostile takeover. This was a collapse of ethics, and that kind of collapse was heavier than any number on a balance sheet. While Richard walked, Ava sat in her office with her hands covering her head, breathing in broken gasps. Her desk was covered in unsigned papers, unapproved contracts and apology letters, written and torn apart and rewritten again. Each time she lifted her head, she saw her reflection in the glass, a face she once believed symbolized power, success superiority, now distorted by fear and remorse. She remembered Lena's eyes from the night before, not angry, not vengeful, but seeing straight through her armor of arrogance and exposing the emptiness beneath. Ava wanted to find Lena and apologize, but how could an apology matter when it only came after everything was already ruined? Tyler hid in the COO office, the blue glow of his powered-off screen still reflecting on his pale face. His phone was off, but messages still poured into his email, into his company inbox, into dozens of internal group chats. You cost us billions. You made us a joke. This is the consequence of your stupid live stream. Tyler, who once believed his video would bring him followers, now wished he could disappear. He held his head, wondering why he turned on the camera, why he laughed, why he treated someone else's humiliation as entertainment. Each thought was another needle stabbing his mind. On the 50th floor, the boardroom still carried the scent of strong coffee and the cold air from the vents, but the atmosphere was so heavy it felt like it could be cut with a knife. The board members had been meeting for hours, analyzing every risk, every market reaction, every legal implication, every media consequence, and they all reached the same conclusion. The only way to keep Harrington Industries from collapsing completely was to give Lena Brooks full authority to lead the restructuring. When Lena entered the room for the second time that day, everyone stood not out of courtesy, but out of unavoidable respect. Lena wore a deep grey suit, no jewelry, nothing flashy. Yet her presence altered the energy of the room instantly. Her voice was low, steady, each word landing on the table like a thin steel needle. I want every internal report delivered to me within 24 hours. That includes the company culture assessment, HR reports, the list of ongoing lawsuits being kept quiet, and all internal employee complaints. A board member swallowed hard. All of them. Some files are very sensitive. Lena looked at him unblinking. Sensitive is precisely why I need to see them. No one dared argue. She continued, I also want HR to immediately contact an independent consulting organization to initiate an unconscious bias assessment program. Mandatory for all mid-level managers and above. And I want daily progress updates. Another member asked quietly. Within 30 days, correct? Lena nodded. 30 days. not a single hour late. Pens scribbled in unison. Whispered discussions spread around the room. But in every pair of eyes there was a strange seriousness, as if they were watching the future of the company take shape in the form of the woman standing before them. The meeting went on for another hour. When it ended, Lena gathered her documents, but did not leave yet. She turned back and addressed the board one more time. I am not here to protect the Harrington family. I am here to protect a company collapsing under the weight of its own distorted values. Remember that when we begin this restructuring. Every person in that room who once believed Lena did not belong at a gala now looked at her as someone redefining what power truly meant. But outside in the parking lot below, another scene unfolded. Eleanor sat in the car, clutching her purse, tightly, head bowed. She could not bring herself to enter the building, could not face the employees, could not face the board. She had never seen the world turn on her so quickly. My whole life, she whispered. I only tried to protect the family's reputation. Richard turned to her eyes, bloodshot. We were not protecting our reputation. We were protecting an illusion. Ava stood beside the car, eyes swollen, her voice smaller than the faintest breeze. If last night we had just been kind. Tyler let out a bitter laugh. If last night I did not live stream. But Richard shook his head. No, Tyler. The mistake did not start with the live stream. It started with the way we look at people. The words fell like a slab of stone, both truth and judgment for their entire family. At that same moment on social media, thousands of posts filled the internet, showing Lena walking into Harrington Tower that morning, accompanied by a single caption shared tens of thousands of times. This is what a woman looks like when she does not need to raise her voice for the world to listen. And while the internet continued to explode, Lena stepped out of the building, the noon sunlight pouring across her shoulders. No one knew what she was thinking, but the feeling radiating from her steps was unmistakable. She had not come to avenge. She had come to cleanse a system that had lived too long on prejudice and privilege. And that cleansing had only just begun. On the third day after the gala, no one called the Harrington ordeal a scandal anymore. From Wall Street boardrooms to small coffee shops in Brooklyn, from morning financial news to social and cultural podcasts, everyone used the same word, turning point. A turning point no one expected to erupt in a single night, and even fewer imagined would be sparked by a woman who had remained silent for most of the event. Yet, ironically, that silence echoed farther than any outcry America had heard in years. Harrington Tower was no longer a symbol of power, but a monument of humiliation so palpable that stepping into the lobby felt like carrying the weight of collapse on your shoulders. And paradoxically, within that collapse, something new was beginning to take root. The receptionist, the same one who had avoided Lena's eyes at the gala, stood up during an internal meeting and said, I have never seen anyone stand up to leadership like that. For the first time, I believe this company can change. A mid-level engineer wrote a public internal email. If we were once afraid to speak, then now is the time we need to raise our voices. Employees who had long been overlooked now spoke more directly, more clearly, more boldly, as if Lena had not only dismantled the Harrington family, but also shattered the wall of silence wrapped around the entire system. The media did not hold back in their analysis. CNBC ran the headline, From Discrimination to Reform. Harrington Industries, under the guidance of its most powerful shareholder. CNN spent 2 hours discussing leadership accountability. Social commentary channels called Lena the most powerful black woman in America without holding political office. But Lena did not care. When she walked into her temporary office on the 48th floor, her mind focused on 3 things: the employees, the company structure, and principles. Not fame, not praise, not the triumph the world had tried to pin on her. She thought only about doing what was right. But that evening, as she stood before the glass wall, overlooking New York, glowing like an artificial galaxy, she knew that even if she didn't want it, she had become a symbol. Because of the way she remained silent. Because of the way she stood firm. Because of the way she used power without needing to display it. Across the city, the Harrington family lived in a completely different reality. Ava woke at 4 in the morning, checking her inbox, but too afraid to open a single message. She knew everything was over: the CEO title, the career, the reputation, all lost because of a few words she believed were harmless. Tyler sat on his bed, hands clenched until his knuckles turned white. He could not sleep, could not eat, could not drown out the sound of his own mocking laughter in that disastrous live stream. He had become a meme, a joke, the textbook example of ignorant privilege. Eleanor prayed in the living room, something she had never done before, tears running over half-finished makeup. She wondered if she had paused for 1 second that night, if she had simply looked at Lena as a human being, would everything be different? Richard sat quietly in the library, once the room that held the most important corporate documents. But today he held only a newspaper, a market analyst's interview. Harrington did not fall because of finances. They fell because of character. That sentence stabbed deeper than any loss report ever could. Meanwhile, inside Harrington Tower, Lena stood before the entire company in the first internal live stream after the crisis. No embellishment, no grand speeches, no theatrics, only truth. Change, she said, does not come from saying we will change. It comes from how we treat each other when no one is watching. The words pulled hundreds of employees into silence, a different silence this time. Not fear, but realization. A realization of something they had never dared articulate during the decades under Harrington rule. A warehouse staff member, someone who had never been invited to a high-level event, stood up and said, "Thank you for making us feel like we matter." Lena nodded softly, not to accept praise, but to show she heard them, truly heard them. And that was what made the restructuring not just corporate, but human. At the end of the day, as Lena walked out of the building, a few employees waited in the lobby just to say, "We are here with you." People who once never dared look directly at leadership now looked at Lana with the eyes of those who finally had hope. And though she did not show it, though she kept her composure, her heart warmed. Not because of victory, but because she witnessed an awakening in a workforce long suppressed by fear and the arrogance of a dynasty. That night, as she stepped onto the street, the city buzzed as usual, but in her mind, one truth was clear. This reform was no longer about Harrington Industries, no longer about a cancelled deal, no longer about a humiliating gala night. It had become something larger, a message, a reminder, that sometimes all it takes is one person to stand up and say enough, and an entire system can change forever. And Lena, though she never wanted to be a torchbearer, had become the light leading the way. Tomorrow she would begin the next chapter of that fight. But tonight, all of America was talking about her, and it was one of the rare times a black woman stood at the center, not because of tragedy, but because of power. Lena knew it, and she would use it the right way. 1 week after the fateful meeting, Harrington Industries had changed so drastically that even employees who had worked there for 10 years could barely recognize the company. No more half-hearted nods paired with forced smiles whenever leadership walked by. No more suffocating silence pressing down on the lower floors like a permanent shadow. No more heavy conference rooms where even a loud breath made people tremble. No more sense that the company belonged to an arrogant dynasty everyone else had to obey. Instead, meeting room doors were open, internal briefings were live-streamed, discussions were real, and voices, once dismissed as background noise in the hallway, now carried weight. Lena walked down the corridor of the 48th floor, her steps light yet firm, her gaze moving from person to person, as if evaluating whether the flame of reform she had ignited was spreading in the right direction. Employees greeted her with eyes full of respect, not fear. Some even smiled sincerely, a smile they had never dared to give any leader before. When she entered the newly designated executive office, the one that used to belong to Richard, no member of the board dared sit until Lena took her seat. There is no power greater than the respect people choose to give you freely. Today on the table lay the first week's restructuring report, thick enough to be a book, and every page carried truths buried for far too long: discrimination, complaints, cases of power, harassment, threatening meetings, a culture of suppression, fear woven into every employee's daily life. Lena read slowly like a doctor, reviewing the medical file of a patient who had nearly died because they were left untreated. The HR director stood beside her fingers, gripping the clipboard tightly. Lena looked up. Everyone connected to these reports must be suspended for investigation. No exceptions. "Yes, ma'am?" someone asked softly. "And the Harrington family?" Lena paused briefly. "They answer to accountability like everyone else." Behind the frosted glass of the conference room, Richard waited. No flawless suit, no three-piece vest, no aura of authority that once made competitors look away the second he raised his head. Today, he was just an aging man with hollow eyes and shoulders sagging under the weight of his own mistakes. When Lena stepped out, he stood upright, not too close, not too far, maintaining a distance that showed the respect he never offered her before. "I read the report," he murmured. It is far worse than I imagined." Lena nodded. "It reflects what your employees have been living with." Richard lowered his eyes. "Do you think there is anything I can still do to make this right?" Lena studied him for several seconds before answering. "You can start by not hiding anything anymore, not protecting what should be exposed, and not treating silence as a safe option." The words made Richard slowly nod, like a man finally realizing he had lived his entire life in the dark while believing he was standing in the light. Outside the building, the media waited, but this time they were not asking about scandals or deals. They were asking about reform, about a new culture, about leadership, accountability, about Diane Williams, the new CEO Lena had nominated, and the board had approved, almost unanimously. When Diane entered the room beside Lena, right after her appointment was confirmed, a wave of respect spread across the space. At last, the company had a leader, not because she carried the Harrington name, but because she had competence and heart. And Lena, who had refused the CEO position, simply stood behind her, watching with quiet composure. You do not need a throne to prove your power. Ironically, the most powerful people are often the ones who choose not to sit in the seat of power. The day ended with a major press conference, where Diane announced a series of new policies But the moment that made the entire audience hold its breath was when Lena stepped onto the podium. She said only one passage. "Justice does not come from punishment," she said. "It comes from rebuilding, from ensuring no one ever faces the kind of disrespect I faced, and from believing that a good company is not one that never makes mistakes, but one that knows how to rise from them." The press fell silent. Some people in the room shed tears. The entire industry watched the broadcast live. And when Lena stepped off the stage, the camera flashes no longer targeted her, like someone caught in a scandal, but like someone opening a new era. That night, when she returned to her small apartment, the sky had already darkened, and the city glowed with a soft amber tint, almost like a congratulatory light. Lena stood by the window, looking down at the traffic, swirling like the veins of a giant living body. She knew tomorrow would bring more challenges. Reform is never easy. Justice never arrives without resistance. But she also knew something else. A legacy had begun to take shape. A legacy not written by power, but by dignity. Not by fear, but by respect. And not by the Harrington name, but by the actions of those brave enough to change it. Lena closed her eyes, letting the final breath of the day escape gently. Tonight, for the first time in years, she felt something simple, yet powerful. She was standing exactly where she was meant to stand. And this time, the whole world stood with her. From the perspective of an expert in organizational management and power culture, Lena Brooks's story reveals a timeless truth. Real power does not lie in executive chairs. It lies in the ability to stand tall in the face of injustice, to hold dignity firm, and to force an entire system to confront the truth. A single act of disrespect can bring down an empire, but a courageous, sharp, and principled action can rebuild an entirely new culture. Lena did not triumph through anger. She triumphed through intellect composure and the belief that respecting human beings is the only foundation of true sustainability. If this story resonates with you, like the video to help spread meaningful values and subscribe so you never miss journeys where justice and human dignity come first. And comment with the phrase "stand up" to remind each other that sometimes all it takes is one person brave enough to rise, and the whole world changes.